All right, here we go with another episode of Everything Combat, and joined by my co-host, Jeffrey Wilson.
What's up, buddy?
We are going to interview a guy that, I'm proud to say this. He was my really idol my entire athletic career, which spanned from kindergarten all the way into my early 40s. And I still idolize this guy. He's done some amazing things that most people would never even consider trying. He's a two-time NCAA Wrestling Champion, an Olympic gold medalist, among other things. He had a winning record as the head coach at the University of Iowa of 355 wins against 21 losses, 152. And I'm just going to go right down the line. I don't want to miss anything. 152 All-American wrestlers underneath this man, 45 national champions, 106 Big Ten champions, 12 Olympians, 8 medalists. And was also the thing that I think is one of the most amazing things about this gentleman's career as a wrestler was that he was the Tbilisi champion in Russia, which I think maybe 14 or 15 men have ever won that from America. So this is a unique individual who has driven many, many people, not just the guys that wrestled for him in his room, but men across the country and boys across the country who wrestled, who never met him, who were motivated by him and idolized him. So we're very, very proud, very excited to have Dan Gable on the show today. How are you, Dan?
15-time NCAA championship coach, too. Sorry. 15-time NCAA champion coach.
17.
Oh, sorry. Jeez. How are you
So
doing?
actually, I'm going to correct you. It is 15, but I had a couple as an assistant. So
Okay. Well, I'm counting the other two, so there.
All right. Well, that's okay.
All right. So anyway, throughout your career, you've done some amazing things, and really, what I have to ask you is, at what point in your life did the switch click for you as a wrestler to where you said, I get it? That's the thing that has always stuck with me. I've never had a chance to ask you that, where you just finally said, I truly get it. I understand it. It's like a Rubik's Cube that I've figured out. And how old were you, and why do you think that is?
Hey, that's a great question. I always had that competitive ability to usually get the most out of myself. And that is a very important aspect, just knowing how to compete and knowing how to compete at that highest level. And, what that highest level is changes all the time also, just because you learn new things and there's new ways and there's new science. So you're forever kind of moving forward. But I would say that, even though I was undefeated in high school for 3 years, that's the 3 varsity years that I had because I was only eligible for 3 years. Ninth grade was junior high. And then, I went to college and as a freshman, we weren't eligible either, but I got to wrestle in a lot of events and I was undefeated there. And then my sophomore year, I was undefeated and I'm the national champion. And so, I have a lot of matches under my belt and I'm undefeated in collegiate wrestling or scholastic wrestling. But I think it was my junior year in college, probably about a month into the season, my junior year. So now I got a lot of wins under my belt, but all of a sudden I started dominating in practice like I hadn't before. I was always winning in practice, but if I went up a weight class or two and took on somebody that was a little bit bigger than me, maybe they would beat me. Maybe it'd be a tough match. Maybe it would be, not really a decisive victory. So all of a sudden, about a month into my junior year, so now we're going through 3 years in high school. We got a freshman year in college. We got a sophomore year in college. And now we're into my junior year. All of a sudden, I started going to a new level of excellence that I had never been to. And by that, I mean, I went up weight classes. I took on everybody in the room. I don't believe I lost a practice in my junior year. I mean, I didn't lose any matches, but I mean, I didn't even lose a practice no matter who I wrestled against. And I started wrestling against everybody in the room. So, that's, and I'm a lightweight. I mean, I was probably 140, 150, probably wrestled 142 at that time, or 137 even. But I walked away every day the victor, and that just didn't happen before that. I was, always a smaller kid, but I couldn't even beat some of the guys that were one weight class above me. And so, all of a sudden things, started clicking. So I started getting more confidence. And I think that was probably the first time that I ever realized that things are working for me. But as long as I'm talking, I'm going to roll here. So all of a sudden, my last match in college, so all through the junior year, outstanding wrestler in the nation, most pins and all that kind of stuff, team championships. Going into my senior year, I go all the way to the finals, and the finals is against a young man named Larry Owings, and I lose that match, and I lose it in the last 20 seconds, but he had actually pulled ahead of me early, and then I pulled ahead of him, and I was in a position to win. But even if I would have won that match, which, it could have, depending, it was a call that could have went probably either way, but, it doesn't always go your way. That's just the way it is. So it didn't go my way, and I lost that match.
If you don't mind, and I don't mean to interrupt you, Dan, can you speak to why that was? Because there was an element, like you said,
right?
You hadn't applied yourself as much as you wanted to, and he kind of pulled the Muhammad Ali and got into your head a little bit.
He got in my head. He spoke a lot out verbally, and I started reading the newspaper during the tournament. But more than that, I started actually taking on a different role in my wrestling. By that I'm saying I'm starting to be an advocate for the whole sport, because the press was wanting to interview me, talk to me, that type of stuff. And I think the coaches and everybody else thought that there's no chance this guy's going to get beat. So I really had some people that were, looking out after me, but they really thought that the confidence level was so high. But anyway, you know what? It doesn't happen that way. No matter who you are, no matter how good you are, if you're not ready every time out, you're more vulnerable. And I was definitely vulnerable in that match. Things happened in that match that never happened to me before. And they may have happened, but I didn't realize it before because I was not actually going through the same routine, the one that you use for warm-up, the one you use for psych, the one you use for mental. And because of that, it taught me a lot about not only my wrestling, but it taught me a lot about my coaching career. So anyway, because of that loss, that gave me the opportunity to get a lot better again. So there's another point right there. So all of a sudden I realized how good I was. And then I got a lot better in my junior year because of being able to go up and beat other people in other weight classes, having all winning practices. And then all of a sudden after that loss, which most people thought I was pretty good by then, I had 181 straight wins, and I had pinning streaks that still hold up. But all of a sudden, I started getting better again quicker than I ever had before because of that loss. And that's what took me to the next level. That loss gave me the opportunity to get better again, to be more motivated, to understand more about what I needed to understand in my own abilities. And so I started doing strategies, and I started doing a little bit more artistic type of wrestling instead of just tough wrestling. And so now I kind of had it all.
That's a huge deal. It's a huge deal, Dan, for you to not. I mean, that's a life lesson. For some people, look at a loss as like a failure, where other people look at a loss as an opportunity to grow, and that's exactly what you did. And that can't be understated. That's really huge because, like you said, you took your stuff to a whole nother level after first being devastated by the loss.
It took a good family support, and I always say I don't like to use the word luck, but lucky is when you're kind of born into a group of people that really look out for you. So I had a lot of people looking out for me. But so I was able to kind of start to get off track, and somebody would get me back on track just from a a verbal or, somebody was meaningful to me. And I had a lot of good friends too, and they knew what I had put into it. So no, I was able to go to a higher level than ever before in quicker time than I've ever did. I think I actually got as much as I got between my sophomore year in high school to my senior loss, which is like 7 years later. I improved every year, but I improved in the next year after that loss as much as I improved in that 7 years. And it's because I started looking at the sport. I started looking at myself. I started looking at what I need to do, not just be a tough guy. And so that's kind of the meaning of this painting that is out there on me right now, called The Art of the Fight.
Oh, yes.
And it's something that I had this fight, and Russians look at us like we're good conditioned, good athletes, we're good fighters, but we don't look at our sport like an artist looks at a painting. And that means that there's a lot of fine tuning. There's a lot of really fine elements. And so I still had to keep that toughness, and I had to start becoming more of an artist in my sport to be able to go to the next level and win a world and Olympic championship.
And you can find, ladies and gentlemen, the www.mikekupka.com, Kupka, and you can find the paintings Dan's talking about, The Art of the Fight, mikekupka.com.
Now, and are these paintings being bid on, or is there a set price for the copies? I mean, how do people go about that, Dan?
Yeah, no, they're on the website. There's some affordable ones for young people for great holiday gifts. I mean, there's $30 nice artistic paintings that are great for young people or anybody. But then there's also for people that really get into art collections and that like to have famous paintings of certain people. And if I'm in that category, they go up in price. I mean, They start out, I think, about $30 for those posters, but they go all the way up to. I think they're pretty expensive. I mean, they could be. I mean, I think there might be a $2,000 or $3,000 painting in there, but they're a lot different, obviously, and they're kind of masterpieces, that type of stuff. So
yeah, for an art collector, that's not a high price to pay for people that love art, especially art around sports and around legendary sports figures. So that's certainly more affordable than I think a lot of people expected, which is awesome. So I would expect those paintings to go pretty quick.
Well, I hope so. I like to promote the sport of amateur wrestling, and what's kind of funny is that there's I'm a wrestler, never really did a lot of martial arts. I did some. Well, actually, wrestling is a martial art. So
yeah,
as far as I'm concerned, but I did some judo stuff, and I combined it with my wrestling, and it came through in a world semifinal match where I was actually in a struggling match, and I hit a foot sweep, which really isn't a known wrestling hold. I mean, we do have it, but it's more like in jiu-jitsu or judo, and I hit an unbelievable foot sweep that sent my opponent in orbit, and about knocked him out. But I don't. He may still be up there, but I think he landed because I had to turn him over and pin him. But he was knocked out almost, and they didn't know it. But
wow,
it was one of those things that when you kind of spread yourself a little bit, and I know that Pat, you did a lot of fighting and MMA, and you got this grip called the Gable grip that's even involved with the MMA. So it's pretty good.
And I when I do seminars, I cuss at the MMA people that don't know it yet.
Well, they better learn it real quick.
That's because of you. That's a day one thing in Iowa, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
It really is. So I want to go back to your junior year when everything started clicking. And I've got to drag you back there because I want people to understand who didn't grow up wrestling. To even be good enough to be in a Division I level wrestling program is pretty hard to do. I mean, you've got to be a pretty special individual. But to be able to go into a room weighing, like you said, wrestling at the weight that you did, you weren't a huge man. You were 150 pounds max. and smashing the heavyweight and the 190 pounders, 197 pounders, stuff like that on the team and beating those guys. I don't think people fully comprehend how difficult of an order, how tall of an order that is. I mean, that for professional athletes in combat sports, for people to understand that, that would be like Floyd Mayweather beating Mike Tyson when he was the heavyweight champ, and also being able to, when Evander Holyfield was the cruiserweight champion, being able to beat him, and on down the line, you know, to a Bernard Hopkins at middleweight or super middle, you know, all those types of guys that were much bigger, and being able to beat those guys in a boxing match. That's basically the equivalent of what you were doing against all your teammates in a Division I room.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I think one of the strategies, and I go back to that conditioning aspect, is that I was able to bring them down to a lower level of what their really true effectiveness was. And so all of a sudden they might have had something good.
Might have had something to do with your speed and aggressiveness too, right?
Well, yeah, I'm sure that. But I'll tell you what it really had to do with physics. You know, you say you go to school to learn how to wrestle, you learn how to go to, you know, different classes, but I'll tell you, the physics class is one for fighters and for wrestlers that you really want to kind of understand, because you got to really kind of understand what it is if you really want to do it, and then you'll go about doing it more. So it's like me, even though I weighed 150 pounds, I was using my opponent's weight against him. I was using my weight against him. And so whatever he weighed and whatever I weighed, that's how much power I had. So, you know, that leverage, it's like going up and picking up weights. I mean, if you're a weightlifter, there's technique involved. There's strategy involved. It's not just straight grunt. And that's kind of you go back to that painting again. That's that artistic part. And so I learned a lot of really angles, and I learned a lot of positioning by just squatting and putting my weight down. What's kind of funny is I got all these grandkids, and it's automatic. I go to pick up a grandkid, and he don't want to pick me up, and he's only 1 year old, and he goes into a full squat, and he's a lot more heavier down on the weight, because he's got all his weight down in one little ball, and it's like it's not spread out. And that's kind of what happened when somebody would shoot on me. I would hit him with not a weight of extension, but all that weight was squashed and put him out of position. So, it's basically that comes from practice. You know, you got to learn that. It's got to become a natural kind of reaction, and then, you know, then you're going to be a lot better.
Yeah. So and I wanted to ask you a question about, you know, wrestling technique, and as it relates to, you know, wrestling's been around for at least 2,000 years, we know. Same as pancration, which was wrestling with the fighting involved in it, which is modern day MMA, is that version of pancration. But when we think about it, and I see people and they'll say, "Hey, I invented this technique. Look at this." And whenever that's something that I'll never claim ever in my life, that I invented anything that had to do with fighting. I would say maybe I rediscovered it, because things go in cycles, I think, and I want to get your feedback on that. In all the years of my fighting and wrestling and everything else, you as a group, a training group, guys would get good at certain things, certain setups for techniques, whatever, and then everybody that person trained with would become wise to it, and it no longer became effective, so to speak. They'd have to move on to something else, a different setup, whatever it was. But I think, and then new ways were created, and it was a constant evolving thing with technique. And I think that throughout history, obviously, that has gone on in cycles, that cyclical cycle throughout history, and things just get rediscovered, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. What's really interesting here is, you know, some of our most famous wrestlers, John Smith, David Schultz, these guys had an ankle cross that they did to a lot of people when they got on top of them, you know, and it's painful, but it's so painful it allows you to turn the guy several times and win the match just on a technical fall. But everybody, you know, a lot of people don't master that, and so it goes away for a while. Then you see all of a sudden John Smith and Dave Schultz performing this, and all of a sudden they get the claim, they get the reason that moves out there. But you go back. I watched the Olympics in '68 in Mexico City, and there was an Iranian that actually put that same move on Bobby Douglas, and Bobby fought it and tore his knee up, so he couldn't even perform anymore. But those moves are evolved, and it just takes the time to actually perfect it, and that's what most people don't do, take the time to perfect it. So they're around for a long time. Now there are some things that really are astonishing this year with Kyle Snyder getting pinned in the World Finals by a Russian wrestler that came out and hooked elbows and rolled him to his back, and people were saying, even Kyle, he said he hadn't seen that double hook before, and it's like, yeah, but then I looked and I see where the Russian's from. He's from Dagestan down there, and all of a sudden I look and I look at the wrestler that I wrestled in the Olympic finals and he was from Makhachkala, and he's from that same area down there. And I remember one of the things that he used to do to a lot of people was he would hook elbows and he would hook arms. And this is back in '72 when we're in the Olympic finals. So, things evolved from a long time ago. And I'm sure that Ruslan Ajruliev didn't invent it. He probably got it from somebody else. And then now all of a sudden it kind of went away because it's a hard move to learn. And now it's going to come back again. I mean, in Iowa, we got a kid named Spencer Lee, and he won the Nationals last year as a freshman, and he's showing a new skill on top. And it's not really a new skill. It just hadn't been around for a while. But now a lot of people are trying to do it. Now they can't do it as well as he can because he's been perfecting it for a long time. But it's coming around again, and a lot of people are turning people a little bit easier than they have from the top position. So that's kind of what you're talking about. And you're right. Wrestling's been around for a long time, and some of these same holes were back then, but sometimes they just kind of change the rules, and because they change the rules, you adapt to the rules, and you might not use the same skills. You may have to find some other skills to adapt to the rules to make the sport that much easier.
Right.
Interesting how such an old sport can evolve like that. That is so very fascinating.
Yeah, and I just think the human body hasn't changed in 2,000 years. So we've had the same thing to work with, our brains in another body.
Right.
And, we just rediscover stuff. And that's why I say I've never invented anything that has anything to do with fighting. I've never invented a single thing. So I'd love to move on to how you used to cut weight. And your old quote that I remember when I was younger was, you can eat anything you want. I'm just paraphrasing. You can eat anything you want as long as you're willing to work it off. And I kind of followed that. I really did. I would run the amount of miles that I had to, and wrestle for as long as I had to keep my weight down or get my weight down to make weight. And I never missed weight as a wrestler, as a kid. I never missed weight as a fighter. But now we're running into an epidemic in the sport of mixed martial arts, where people are, even for world title fights, Coach, and gals are missing weight, and it's almost like it's an epidemic in society. Like there's no personal responsibility, and it's pretty troubling to me. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on people's excuses on not making weight, because I'm just assuming here, but I don't guess you ever missed weight.
No, I didn't, and I always used to like to add this comment to it that I like to be able to be tough enough to be able to eat whatever I want. And besides what you said, just working it off. And I really don't use the term cut weight anymore. And I think that the MMA and, those fighting people actually should study that aspect of more, and they should not be in a position that they're going to lose a whole lot of weight at one particular time. I mean, you can go to, to be honest with you, when I went to wrestling practice, if I had a hard wrestling practice, yeah, just for a short period of time, when I came down after practice, I jumped on the scale. I've lost up to 12 pounds in a wrestling practice, and that was a lightweight. So,
Right.
But you also learn that you want to keep some liquid going through you so you can have some better performance in practice. But sometimes when you're on a roll and you're feeling well, and you just you end up sweating a lot, and that's the way it is. But you can't depend on it on that way, because you need to be able to have your weight down. Every day that I went to practice, every day at the last year for the Olympic Games, by the time practice was started, as compared to when it was over, I could have made weight at that end of practice.
Right.
It's just, so it's one of these things that a lot of people don't take the discipline, and you kind of go back to the old school. Well, you don't go back to old school, because it's new school. That's what you want, because you want to keep learning and evolving, and you want to actually manage your weight if you're going to be somebody that loses weight, and you don't want to do it to the point where it hurts your performance, or you may mess up and miss the weight, and then what's that do? You're not going to be able to compete. It's just that simple. So,
well, and that's the quagmire that we found ourselves in mixed martial arts, because as we remember as wrestlers, if you didn't make weight, you didn't get to wrestle. Well, now in mixed martial arts, people are not making weight and they still get to fight. They just lose 20% of their purse, so they're still getting paid, still competing, and now it's just, you can see it just it started out as a crack, and now it's a massive opening in the dam, and a lot of athletes are not making weight. And the thing that's even worse is, as a wrestler growing up, you have to make weight over and over and over again for every match, every tournament, throughout the entire season, where these athletes that are professional fighters, they only have to make weight 3 to 4 times a year, right. And it's even less excusable for midweight. And so I've gone off about it numerous times, even on air, that it's so inexcusable that this is happening. And I got in hot water. This is as far as down the political road I'll take you, Dan. But I was in the middle of a broadcast, and the day before, one of the female athletes had a lot of trouble. She did not make weight, and her trainers, she had her arms draped over the shoulders of her trainers, and they were literally dragging her feet, walking her away from the scale after she tried to weigh in, and it looked pretty bad. And the next night, she was performing great. She had rehydrated and great, and was destroying her opponent. And my broadcast partner, Michael Chavello, who you remember from he did an interview with you. Michael said to me, he said, she looks amazing tonight. You can't even tell that she had trouble making weight yesterday. And I said, yeah, Michael, I said, because yesterday she was doing the Clinton shuffle, because that was right around the election time when Hillary was having all kinds of problems. And my producer actually yelled in my ear and told me not to say that anymore.
Wow.
But that's the type of stuff we're dealing with constantly in the sport. And it's unfortunate, because it never crossed my mind to not make weight.
Well, here's the thing also. It's like, you want to not make it the number one thing in your life. The number one thing is actually to learn how to get good, to learn how to be good, to learn how to win, to learn how to be successful. And I have this quote that says, anybody can make weight, but not anybody can win. And so what's happening, those people that aren't making weight aren't really doing the things that's proper to win. Right. And because of that, they kind of fit into that category. So that's what they have to discipline themselves up to. They got to realize that every day when you go to practice, if you have a good, hard practice, you're going to be able to walk out after practice and be able to make your weight. And if you can't, then you're going to have to adjust and get to that point where you can do that. And you got to do it over a period of time, too. You just don't get it down to where you can do it for a week. You do it the year round. So my whole last year before the Olympic Games, every day, I actually weighed. I think my weight was about almost 150. That was what I could weigh, and I weighed in at 157 every day. And every day I'd weigh out on or over a pound or under a pound. So, it's just a matter of what you need to focus on. And if you focus on being successful and winning instead of making weight, because that becomes a mandatory thing that you control. That's controllable. How good you are is somewhat controllable, but you might go against some genetic guy that's got more genetics than you, and you just sometimes can't control that. I mean, that was determined maybe when you were born, and probably was. So,
yeah.
Well, and some of your
stuff you really can't control. Go ahead.
Some of your teammates, Coach, you say you walk off the mat. Some of your teammates said you go so hard they would literally have to carry you off the mat. I mean, and speaking to that, you ran the engine in the red, for so long at such a high level. What were your and even after wrestling, what were currently, what are your tips, especially back then, as far as staying healthy? That's such a crazy, rigorous sport on the body.
Managing your life. I mean, being smart, recovering. Even if I had to do it over again, I would go back and I could be better than I was because I have a lot more knowledge now. But, it's one of these things that, if you're really sore and you're beat up, you go into that practice and you got to know what you have to do to get out of that soreness, and because that could evolve into an injury, could evolve into bad attitude and all those things. So for me, if I really was sore and I really needed a tough workout, most of my practice was warming up until I felt like I was not sore anymore and I could go. And so, it's one of these things, and that kind of helps. But usually you're smarter than that. You kind of know when you have to compete, and that's when you have to perform. And so you don't want to go into performance by being all that weight over or all that muscle sore. So that's the smart way of training. And
you definitely put the time in.
A little bit to you.
You definitely put the time in. I heard you remark in an interview something about Michael Jordan says about being great, you have to at least put in 10,000 hours. And you had said something like, I'd put in 10,000 hours by beginning of high school or whatever it was you said. What do you speak to that 10,000 hours comment, if you don't mind?
Well, that 10,000 hours is a pretty interesting statement. And so I figured it out, and I think I had it done by the end of my freshman year in college. And I really hadn't started college wrestling until my sophomore year because freshmen weren't eligible. So at that level, I had 3 years of college, and then I had another 2.5 years of international. So I had 10,000 hours in between my junior high school, and my first maybe year of college. So that is
called dedication, folks. One question before we let you slide, I don't want to keep you too long. Everybody in the world of professional wrestling, and I know you weren't a professional wrestler, but obviously a fantastic amateur wrestler. Everybody has an Iron Shiek story. His real name is Khosrow Vaziri. And speaking of Iranian wrestlers, the Iron Shiek, a.k.a. Khosrow Vaziri. Do you have any good stories about Sheiky, baby?
Yes, I'll tell you I do. He's one of my guys that really helped make me famous. He probably helped me win the Olympic Games because when I trained at the University of Minnesota before the Olympic Games for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, he was there. He lived there. He was up in that area doing his professional wrestling, and he came over to work out with some of the bigger guys. But again, I wrestled the bigger guys a lot, so me and him went at it a couple times, and by the time he left that practice or those practices, he basically sent the word out to the world because he, is from Iran. Iran is a great wrestling country. In fact, the Iranians had the number one guy credential in my weight class there, but he was getting up to the age and to where he was starting to maybe slow down a little bit. And I had won the Worlds for the first time the year before, and that was the first time he hadn't won in 5 years, and he was back for the Olympic Games. But I don't know what he did for me, but I think he did enough verbal for me back in Iran that after the first round, the Iranian actually pulled out of the tournament. He was hurt a little bit, but he was getting up there, and he just didn't want to take on this Gable guy, I guess. That so I have to give him a lot of credit for that because,
cool.
word travels fast.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Iron Shiek. Well, that's what you struck fear, man. I mean, you would make people vacate their current weight class to jump to other weight classes. Nobody wanted to mess with Dan Gable.
Well, here's the thing. It was like when the match was over, you lost the match, but you couldn't hardly walk off the match because I kind of beat you up a little bit too much. And it was legal wrestling too. There's still ways to make people
squeal
fall off the mat. Yeah,
and that's what I was saying. I wrestled from 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and I thought, I was just straight technique wrestling, and it was only until like later 9th grade that people were like, no, man, you can really jam them cross faces in there or pressure points and this and that, and I'm like, isn't that dirty or whatever? Like, no, man, sometimes you got to do what you got to do to win the match.
Well, you got the referee there, and he knows when to stop it, and if he don't stop it, then you can just keep doing it.
Right. Hated the crossface. My God, the crossfaces. Jeez.
Well, that means you were on the bottom mostly.
Like I said, well, it was interesting to hear that you were. I wrestled 7th grade, 90 pounds, and then I ended 9th grade at 112. And it was interesting to hear that you were, kicking butt at such a light weight.
Oh yeah, I went from 95 to 103 to 112 to I jumped up to 130 then from in college. Then I went to 137, 142, and then I went up to final. My highest weight was 150. So that's what the world and Olympic weight was. I just kept growing every year, one weight class.
Yeah, I was skin and bones, man. I was one of them late bloomers, man. I was just skin and bones. But I could thank my big brother Lance Wilson for toughing me up a little bit. He would definitely put some butt whoopings on me.
Well, it sounds like you've done all right with yourself. So I think wrestling might have helped you a little bit.
It certainly did during those years, man. It was I didn't think I'd get through it, man. My 7th grade year, I'm like, I'm done. I quit. But I stuck with it.
Well, it might not be as good as girls, but in your terms, but you took that turn.
I made that choice for sure.
I waited till I was done wrestling, then I found me a girl.
Smart man.
So I remember back in many years ago, of course, when Royce Alger decided he was going to get into mixed martial arts, and I know that you weren't real keen on it back in the time. You've always been a pretty reserved guy, unless it was coaching wrestling or while you were coaching during the meet, you never really seemed to go overboard or tell people a whole lot of what you thought. You were always pretty reserved, pretty mellow about stuff. But I can tell you were definitely not overly keen at the time when the sport was new, and you were concerned about the health of the athletes who were getting into it, of course, and which is understandable. It is a very rough sport, but I remember when I had brought a couple of fighters up there, and I wanted them to at least experience the Iowa Wrestling Room during the summer, not during your practices per se during the season, but at least during the summer when the Hawk Club guys were up there, and obviously a lot of monsters are in the room during the summer training and up there working out, and I remember the Brands brothers and Zaleski, and I think you were in the room off to the side, and I was sitting against the wall at the time. It was my turn to sit out, and one of these guys that was not a big time wrestler. He was a good fighter, but not a great wrestler. And he was out on the mat. I can't remember who he was wrestling with at the time, but one of the Brands brothers asked Zaleski while they were out there. I heard him under his breath go, "Do any of these guys know wrestle?" And then at that exact moment, the kid that I brought up there just got launched, got smashed, dumped on his head, and Zaleski looked at him and goes, "No, I don't think they have. I don't think they have." And it was kind of a comical moment for me, with all these monster wrestlers in the room and legends and like yourself. I got a chuckle out of it. Let's put it that way. It was pretty funny.
Well, I tell you, when you brought up Royce Alger's name, I kind of chuckled the whole time just because here's a guy that is just one tough guy. But, here's the thing. It's just like anything else. Mixed martial arts, that's why it's called mixed. I mean, you got to, you can't just do wrestling alone. And that's how, when he got involved with it, he just trained in the wrestling room and only wrestled and really didn't do a whole lot of learning some of the other aspects. And because he didn't have that, yeah, he might be able to be okay and he might do all right, but he wasn't even coming to wrestling practice, only but once or twice a week, and so he just kind of walked in cold. And I tell you, you still got to be in shape, you know. And,
yeah.
And I think when I remember watching him, I think he went really good that first round, and he was looking really good against a tough competitor in mixed martial arts. But all of a sudden, he got exhausted. And I tell you what, no matter who you are, if you're totally wiped out, you know, you still got to train, no matter what you're doing. Still got to train.
Yeah.
You got to be able to hold up. And so, you know, that artistic painting is a lot about science, but I tell you what, don't ever forget that word fight as well. So you got to be able to hold up and compete well.
Well, this is coming from an individual who ran to all of his classes at Iowa wearing ankle weights, so your conditioning was never a question.
State, yeah.
I'm sorry, Iowa State. Yeah, your conditioning was never an issue.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't until I didn't warm up properly one time. Just like anything else, you still got to do your proper warm-ups, because you just jump into some kind of an event that your heartbeat goes from 70 to 200 in about 30 seconds. Yeah, it's going to take you over. You're supposed to gradually work that up. That's what's called warm-up. But I really wasn't ready in that last match, and I got tired right away, and I realized it, and I was thinking about it, and I was supposed to be wrestling. You don't think about how tired you are when you're wrestling. So
right.
That's the way
so now, as far as you're one of your legendary, the things that you're known for is having 4 daughters and having they call it and it's not a curse. I've got 3 daughters. I have no boys, just like most wrestlers and fighters. We seem to have all daughters, but you had 4 daughters, and now they named it the Gable curse. And when I got married and started having kids, I feared the Gable curse, and the product of that is 3 daughters for me, sir.
Well, I'll tell you what, I got 4 daughters, but then I got 4 granddaughters, but I got 8 grandsons. So it kind of evens out. And I'll tell you what, I really enjoy, and that's what I do a lot right now. I do a lot is watching them play football, watching them basketball, watching them wrestle, watching them play baseball mostly. And they're good students, and a couple of them even like girls, but you know, it's one of these things that it's a good time. And I tell you what, when you do a good job, it carries over. So you got 3 daughters, and if you did a good job with them, it's going to carry over for you.
Agreed.
So for me, it's still carrying over. I don't really have too many disappointments out there at all, and I don't plan on having any. So I'm working on it all the time.
Yeah, I get
on it all the time.
Yeah. My kids are wonderful, great students, great swimmers. So I'm very pleased about that. What do you do nowadays to keep yourself in shape? I mean, I'm of course not a professional athlete anymore. I used to be able to do a lot of things that you know, I certainly don't want to get punched in the head anymore and do a bunch of the crazy stuff. But I like to run. I like to work out. My longest run, gosh, a couple of years ago was 75 miles. So I'm trying to ratchet back up and get to where I can do the ultra marathon 100 miler. But I know that you stay busy on the Aerodyne and jump in the sauna a lot and stuff like that still.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of read the situation. If I'm sore, I'll go about certain things. You know, I'm a little bit under the weather right now. I just coming through a little bit of a cold, and so you don't want to go out there and spent and tear your body down. But I'm still going to ride the Aerodyne, and I'm still going to ride it pretty hard, but not going to ride it long. And I think you'll probably get to the point where you start realizing that longevity might not be the thing that you want after a certain point in time when things start getting a little sore, because you can wear those joints out. And so you kind of all of a sudden do a lot of warm-up things, and then you go like hell and you feel great, and then you go recover again, whether it be a hot tub or a cold plunge or a sauna or a steam. I do those things every day. I don't do them anymore longevity-wise. It's more like just to what I need to feel good. That's what keeps you going. But, it's a never-ending process. You hope that you'll never get to the point where you can't do some of these things. But I actually swim a lot, too. When I'm really sore, I just hot tub and swim. And so that's why I go to Florida a little bit, outdoors a little bit in the winter a little bit. But I can't miss too much wrestling either. So of course nowadays you can see it everywhere. Big Ten Network,
Oh yeah.
And
Have you
pretty close.
Have you kicked the Mountain Dew, Coach? In my show research and show prep, I see Mountain Dew was one of your.
I still got some. I told you earlier that if you get tough enough, you can eat about anything. Well, you got to be smart, and so instead of having a 6-pack of Dew, I might only have a couple Dews a day or something like that. Or maybe if I was traveling, I might not have any. But I'd start craving it. I'm a little bit addicted to it. But not bad. So I like, I have a couple, I got a beer out now that's called Gable beer. It's called Munich Helles. And so I only, I got a limit on that as well.
Only two 32 ounces was your rule.
Two, yeah. And 2 16 ounces. If I had 232, I'd go to another case. But, so it's a good beer. So I got this painting out, and then next year there's going to be a movie called The Last Champion that's going to come out. It's not on me, but it's kind of a good Hallmark type of movie, but it's about the sport of wrestling. That's the sport that's involved in the movie, and it's not about the sport of wrestling, but it's about a nice little town that's going to be has a nice story to it. So
did you serve? I get involved. Were you a consultant on that movie?
I've actually got a little part in it, and I'm also I'll be a guy that goes out and kind of leads the direction of it. They'll use me ahead of the movie as it goes to places. But
that's great.
But I do stuff like that. But I'm always thinking about the sport of wrestling, thinking about my family, and those types of things. So I'm not going. I'm not. My life. My health. My health is really important to me. And I work on it just like I worked on my health when I wanted to be a good, healthy wrestler, so there's no difference. But I have tamed down a little bit. I don't think I want to push till I pass out. But, if I pass out, somebody will wake me up.
I love it.
So we won't keep you much longer, but I've got to get these questions out of the way. I'm a ball hog, so to speak, right now with questions over Jeff, but I apologize.
That's quite all right.
Yeah. Back in the day, the legendary stories of the Iowa wrestling team, maybe slapping the wrestling team or some football players around, kind of just jumped into our conversations as when I was in middle school and high school, and those legendary moments of a few Iowa wrestlers getting a little unruly now and then. Wrestlers will be wrestlers, of course, but maybe you have a good story about one of those instances up there in Iowa City.
Well, there's a lot of good stories. There's some that you can tell, and there's some that you can't tell. But they're definitely wrestlers. You want them to be good people, so you got to teach them what their limits are too. But sometimes when they're young and a little bit foolish. We brought Royce Elger's name up, so we might as well stick with him a little bit. I used to go down to the bars every night to about 12 o'clock just to walk in the front door so all the wrestlers would run out the back door. But, but that was part of my routine, which I shouldn't have really had to do it. I should have had more discipline, but they're young kids and I'm not going to tell them exactly what they can and can't do. It's just, they got to learn on their own a little bit, but I had to at least double check a little bit. So anyway, but one time, one of those exits out the back door, Royce, the guy that I had somebody positioned at the door that was non-wrestler, and when I came in, they would kind of have a signal for the people in the back playing pool and having a few beers or whatever they were doing. They would go out the back door. So one time, Royce had to get this last shot in on a pool ball. And so he waited just a little extra second, so he had to run out the door. When he opened that door and ran out, he really wasn't looking where he was going. He ran into a big old tree, knocked himself out, and, one of those things. But the story is that actually a policeman was out back there, and they kind of checking with him, and he says to him, you okay? And Roy says, yeah, and he goes, and he says, sir, I'm going to have to check your, see how many beers you had or whatever. And Roy says, you don't know me? Because, Roy thinks everybody knows him.
Right.
Always. Because, he's pretty famous. But and the guy goes, no, I really don't know you. Can you give me your identification? So he took off running again. And by this time, though, he hit another big tree, and that was it. So they got him. He just he couldn't see that good after dark. I think.
About to say, 2 trees.
I'm not so sure who got the bad end of that, those oak trees or Royce, because Royce probably knocked him down.
Yeah.
He's pretty tough dude, pretty tough guy.
And this will be my last one. I'll let Jeff talk, but one of the funniest stories I've ever heard in my life was 2 Iowa wrestlers. But this was after your coaching years. I'm sure that you talked to the Brands boys and everything about this when it happened. But the Ryan boys up there in Iowa City who were arrested for illegally hunting rabbits in town because they were wanting to get the pelts to make rabbit hats.
Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, here's the thing. You can actually hunt rabbits legally. You don't have to go in town and start shooting them. So it's a little bit not smart on there. In fact, they're right in the city limits, and I think one of the neighbors it was in their garden, and I think the neighbor probably wouldn't have said anything, but they didn't want that guy. You didn't want to see him tearing up their garden. I mean, so he went in there and they called the cops, and they get a little trouble in it. I don't think they did too much hard time, but.
Well, you can take the boy off the farm, but can't take the farm out of the boy, right?
Well, they don't. They just. I mean, listen. I've had kids come from in Montana. I had kids come from, and they're famous kids. They're named Zaddix, and I had them come from South Dakota, named McElravy. These are famous wrestlers that are some of the Iowa's all-time great, but they never could learn. Iowa had speed limits, and South Dakota didn't. North Dakota didn't. Montana didn't, and you could go as fast as you want in those days. So, they would always get in trouble with the police because of speeding, and they just couldn't learn because the first 17 years of their life, they were never under any speed limits. So sometimes you got to realize where you're at, and you got to learn quick. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble.
Right. Well, we won't bug you much more, Coach. We want to get that website again with your artwork that's been done, and also talk a little bit more, the upcoming Iowa meets. Maybe people can get to and watch on Big Ten Network also.
Yeah, The Art of the Fight, www.mikekupka.com, Kupka, Mike Kupka, The Art of the Fight. Some awesome art of Mr. Dan Gable.
Yeah, that's my whole life there, and there's a lot of stories to be told in that, and you won't be able to figure it out, but I can. And you'll hear me talking about it for the rest of my life. So, and hopefully it'll get carried on. Yeah, and I'd say that we have some good wrestling. It's a lot of interesting situations this year with the Iowa wrestling team, because right now Penn State's kind of up there alone, looking like they're kind of going to sail through. But it's too early yet to see what's going to happen. And the Hawkeyes have a lot of new people in there, and they haven't even put some of their starters in yet. They're already ranked like 3rd in the country, but that's not where the Brands like to be ranked. In fact, they don't care where they're ranked. They just want to end up winning the national championship, and that's kind of where they're heading for. So I would say they're going to have to, piece it together a little bit all year long. It's going to be a process that if they're going to win, it's going to take the full year to win, because Penn State is pretty much loaded. Ohio State's got a good team. Oklahoma State's got a good team. Michigan's got a good team. So we don't have many of those dual meets this year either. I think we wrestle Oklahoma State. Otherwise, we're not going to see these guys until maybe tournaments or the Big Ten championship. So we got a good season to look up to. We just don't have a lot of great duels where we're going to go back and forth. We should be able to dominate most of the duels, but got to prove it first. Got to prove it.
Right. Okay. Well, good hearing from you, sir. Thank you very much for your time, for even jumping on with us, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Really an honor.
Absolutely.
No, hey, thanks. I had a great time. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. Dan Gable, ladies and gentlemen.